Hey everybody, Chris here from Tailboard Talks, and today's episode is a really, really special one. We're talking with Molly Jones, who works for a company called Advanced Recovery Systems, who is also the partner with the IAFF Center of Excellence. And what she does is travels the country and puts on presentations, as well as doing an enormous amount of webinars and virtual events. Now, she's coming to my department in about a week or so with the presentation of Behavioral Health Awareness for Spouses and Relationship Reiliencey. That's just one of the many topics that Molly gets into, and one of the many topics that she is absolutely fantastic at talking about. So after today, I'm really hoping that she's on your short list. If you need to reach out to someone to talk to your people, she should be the first one that you think about. All right, really hope you like this one. Talk to you guys soon, and let's get into it. Here comes the intro. Skip forward 30 seconds if you want to get right to the episode. This is the Tailboard Talk podcast, the best health, wellness, and lifestyle resource for the fire service. We're using stories, lessons, and tips from the front lines to give a realistic view of what the job can do to us and how we can make it out alive. I'm Chris Morella, a firefighter since 03, medic since 05, full-time since 08, and promoted to lieutenant in 20. I'm also a personal trainer and strength coach, and I'm here to give you the best information and host the best discussions to make us capable and durable, both on the job and away from it. So grab a heater, steal some fancy creamer from First Shift, and let's go chat. So we might as well just jump into it then. This is actually going to come out tomorrow because I had my dates wrong, and this usually gets posted on Wednesday mornings, and next Wednesday is when you're presenting.
Yes.
Yeah, so we're going to get this thing out now so we can push it around a little bit. And people can kind of get an idea of who you are and what you'll be talking about, and something to look forward to next Wednesday. Or maybe they'll be like, oh, we can have Molly come by and talk to us,
Yeah.
So one of the things I had to learn, shamefully, was who you work for and how you work with the Center of Excellence. So just jump into that real quick. We're not going to do too much backstory stuff. It's kind of a theme on these shows, is like, I can't stand flashbacks and backstories. I like them to come out, and I like talking about people's history and backstory, but when it's like, well, in middle school I did this and that, it just drives me crazy. So let's start with the working relationship between your company, or the company you work for, and the Center of Excellence, and kind of go from there.
Okay. So do you want me to give kind of a background too on what I do?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Because you have a very specific role, which I think is an awesome role, but then we're definitely talking about college. And then that'll kind of grow as that podcast goes. So go ahead and jump in all that stuff.
Okay. So I am Molly Jones. I'm a licensed social worker and clinical education coordinator for Advanced Recovery Systems. And Advanced Recovery Systems is a behavioral health treatment company that was founded in Florida in 2013 by two physicians. And over the years, they have expanded outside of Florida and opened behavioral health treatment companies, or facilities, I should say, that are licensed in primary substance abuse and then focused on co-occurring mental health challenges for the general population. And they've opened these centers kind of coast to coast within the United States. So they have facilities in Florida, Colorado, Washington, Ohio, and New Jersey, with a new center opening in the Atlanta area later this year. But they were approached probably a little bit before 2017, because that's when the Center of Excellence opened. But our leadership team was approached by the International Association of Firefighters to create the Center of Excellence in Upper Marlboro, Maryland. So that is kind of how this relationship began between ARS and the IAFF, and kind of our work with first responders. So they partnered and opened the IAFF Center of Excellence in March of 2017. And it has opened the door for us at Advanced Recovery Systems to really focus more of our time and attention on fire service members and first responders as a whole. I came onto the team in July of 2019 and was primarily tasked with vetting providers. They wanted me to find treatment providers across North America that specialize in treating first responders and then vet them. So essentially make sure that they're legit and have good experience working with first responders before we refer someone from the Center of Excellence to go see them for aftercare, or just on that outpatient level, providing recommendations to first responders that were calling us. We wanted to make sure that we really knew who we were recommending. So that was the primary goal. And then when, well, I guess not when COVID hit, but this was kind of the idea even prior to 2020, but we wanted to get more into this educational space. And then COVID happened. And so I was tasked with creating webinars that were specifically centered or focused on firefighter behavioral health. And we started these in May of 2020, started with a cultural competency presentation for providers, and it's just grown kind of astronomically since then as far as the different rabbit holes that we've gone down with our presentation. So we do just like general behavioral health awareness for fire service members, spouses. We'll talk about peer support. We've done chaplaincy webinars, retirement. We've done webinars even on like union type stuff, like how can labor and management work together to meet behavioral health needs and create those initiatives within departments. So lots of different kind of avenues that we go down with those webinars. And then in the beginning of this year, so January of 2022, I transitioned kind of away from just working with first responders to now offering that education to other members of the public, different groups that are just, have general interest in learning about behavioral health. Like we'll do this series with an organization within their HR department. They're focused on opioids and the opioid epidemic and how can they better support, their the companies that work with them or those employees that those HR professionals are working with. So just kind of expanding upon that education and trying to meet lots of different needs, not just first responder kind of educational needs, but more across the board in terms of populations that we're working with. So I kind of consider myself to be, I joke, but I consider myself to be like a mental health influencer of sorts. So creating content, putting it out there, kind of being this talking head online. People will refer to me as Podcast Molly, which I don't have a podcast. I have a webinar, but I take the compliment. I'm flattered by it.
Same thing, yeah.
Yeah, so that's in a nutshell what I do, and that relationship or affiliation with first responders, or how that kind of came to be.
And one thing I learned when we were doing kind of our pre-talk, we did a phone call like a week ago or so, is that your heart really lies with the first responders, though. Like you may be doing this other stuff now, but it was actually, you said it was more of a difficult transition getting out of the first responder world than it was for you to like understand that you like it and want to be a part of it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that when I first started, it was pretty difficult. I kind of had a breakdown. I was there in Illinois, and I was flying back to Denver, where I'm based, and it was like my first or second month on the job, and I'm waltzing around Chicago and going in and trying to vet all these providers that have been working with first responders for years. And I kind of had a breakdown on the plane and was like, no one vetted me. I don't know anything that I'm doing. So that was difficult. I don't want to downplay that experience at all. But to your question, yes, I mean, my heart really does lie with first responders, and it's been hard to kind of move away from that everyday interaction with first responders, whether it was people needing to get into treatment or just calling and, kind of like peer supporters calling and giving me the rundown of a situation and asking if they're on the right track and, if this is what they should do in terms of helping that person. So that's kind of gone away a little bit. It's not to say that people still can't call me with those questions and, with that need for assistance, but more and more of my time is just focused on research and learning and creating these presentations that I'm doing online and in person. So yeah, I mean, my passion does really lie with first responders. I think I know where you're going with this question, and I can elaborate a little bit on why that is.
Yeah, go for it.
There's this personality, I think, component and the culture that really resonates with me in terms of first responders. Just kind of put it all out there, I guess, the over compartmentalization of your feelings and being sarcastic and having the dark humor and also being extremely, loyal and identifying with your work and your purpose and just kind of the way that first responders in general kind of express themselves is very much in line with who I am. And I just think too, the nature of the work is something that really draws me to it. I started my social work career as a child welfare specialist. So going out into the field and interacting with people kind of in the worst moment of their lives is how I usually described it. They're at risk or have already lost their children, which is, the most oftentimes people's most, prized role or responsibility that they have in life. And then here I am, a 23-year-old nobody, coming and taking those kids from them. It was a really difficult experience, but I learned a lot. And I think that kind of shaped a lot of my personality and to me is in line with the work that first responders are doing, sitting with people in crisis and then trying to help them figure out what to do next, identify the problem, what's the treatment plan going to be, how am I going to help these people get to that next point in life where, they're feeling better. So I feel like a lot of my professional experiences have been in line with that of first responders and helps me to relate. But then that personal component, I think, is what keeps me kind of in it and able to make the quality of connections that I've had the opportunity to make over the last few years.
Well, I think just the ability, and we didn't talk too much about your social worker background in our first call, but I think something that resonates with first responders and people they trust and want to follow and consider leaders is just the ability for someone to stand in front of them and give them a plan or tell them what's going to happen and be confident in it and confident that they know how this thing goes and they're going to have, if not the answers, the way to find the answers as you go along. And there's nothing worse than having, well, there's a lot of things worse, but one of the main irritants for people who bring in outside presenters or resources is you get someone who's taking what they know in whatever space it is, even like nutrition or fitness, and then trying their best to pretend like they're a part of the fire service or the paramedic community. And they're making all these strange parallels that don't really fit. And when it gets 2 or 3 questions deep on like, well, how can I do this on shift? And they don't have an answer for it, but they're trying to fudge a little bit. I mean, that ruins everything. So even your history of having, I'll call it a comfort with confrontation, being able to confidently stand in front of a group of first responders and be like, here's what I know, and here's how I know it affects you guys, and here's the plan that I can give you to get through it, and you can be confident that I'm going to take care of you. I think that's going to do more to build trust and gain a followership than really anything. So yeah, I'd say your background on that is 100% applicable and extremely valuable to what you're doing today. And I can only imagine that you're having confrontations when you go to these places, right? You're not just going to walk in and be like, hey, I'm going to talk to you about some stuff that you've been avoiding for the past 20 years, and we're all going to be friends after the end. I mean, you're gonna walk into a group of skeptical people, and so when you get going and you're starting to do your webinars or you're traveling the country and going to all these departments, at what point did you feel like, oh, okay, I can do this? Like I can connect with these guys, maybe because we're all screwed up together. For some reason, they're listening to me and I have a good influence on them and they trust me. Was there like a turning point and where you really thought like, okay, I'm in, like, this is what I want to keep doing?
Well, I think a part of my personality that probably lends itself towards those strong relationships with first responders is the imposter syndrome. So I don't think that I've ever felt like I know exactly what I'm doing and this is going to be a home run, easy peasy. And maybe that's what makes my presentations so relatable. That's feedback that I get on a regular basis, is just how kind of calm, cool, and just like rolling with it I kind of am in my delivery of the information. And I think it is because I approach it with that mindset of, I don't really know or have all the answers, nor do I want them, but I'm here to tell you what I do know and how I can help. And there's always that skeptic or that person that's maybe a little more pessimistic about the information. And I don't fault them because that's how I am too. I don't take anything at face value and try to kind of poke holes in what someone's saying and read between the lines whenever I can. Sometimes that does me a disservice, but other times, I think it's beneficial. So knowing that that's going to happen and already having that kind of mindset personally, I think really helps me to enter into those friendly debates, as I like to refer to them as, in these presentations with a good attitude. And there are always those naysayers. And I think that oftentimes when we roll in somewhere and whether it's we're just sitting down having a conversation, getting to know the people that we're working with, or maybe we are in that classroom setting, there typically is someone that right out the gate is just like, meh, this is for the birds. This is, just that woo woo feel good kind of stuff. And I don't need this. This is for someone else. And usually those people, by the end of the day or the trip, we've been able to recognize that they are the ones that probably need this information or treatment even the most. So I think having that idea also in the back of my head, or that possibility, helps me to understand where they're coming from. It's probably more comfortable to be skeptical of things like post-traumatic stress disorder or depression or anxiety or whatever the behavioral health challenge is. Easier to say, that's not me, or I've got it under control, than it is to acknowledge that, this relates to me, or these signs and symptoms are things that I'm experiencing in my own life. So that helps, having that perspective or looking through that lens, I think helps me to have empathy for other people, but also enter into those conversations in a way that's a little bit more creative. In our previous conversation or call, we kind of touched on this a little bit. And I think I said that, if someone is skeptical of the information that I'm bringing forward, kind of asking some probing questions around why, or, what part of this do you think is not correct or untrue, or, that you're having difficulty understanding or accepting, and then having that conversation. And I think that helps with stigma, that helps with, education, and maybe even normalizing it a little bit for that person. But as I've said, I'm not afraid of those conversations or arguments or debates or whatever you want to call them. I think that entering into them confidently also helps kind of challenge some of those behavioral health stigmas and things that kind of keep people stuck too. So showing up with an understanding, empathetic attitude, knowing that I don't know it all, and honestly being like, maybe some of this is a little bit baloney, but let's try it out, is my approach. And I think that humanness has helped me a lot.
Yeah. Well, it's also a long game too, right? Like even with something like fitness, I gave up trying to convince people to get in shape a long time ago. And what Kurt and I, the guy I used to work for, and we work together now with the fire department, and we're part of the fitness committee, what we do is just make ourselves available. And we continue to be there and continue to put out whatever we can and continue to help the people we can. And then eventually, when that skeptic's ready to come around, we've been there the whole time. We've been preaching the same things more or less the whole time. We've been a consistent source for the department. So maybe, up to 10 years from now, they'll come and be like, all right, my back is killing me. I do need help. And you guys have been consistent and helpful. So help me out, and you're not going to win anybody that first day. But I think we talked about before too, like you might get a call, a week later, a month later from someone that was your skeptic in class. And they're the ones out of the entire group that might actually reach out to you just later on.
Yeah. Those are the feel good moments when that happens, when those people call and say, one, I'm sorry that I was such a naysayer and had a bad attitude in your presentation. And two, I've really been, reflecting on that. And I think that I may be struggling. Do you have a recommendation of a provider for me? Or I need to admit to the Center of Excellence. Can you help me with that? And of course, we never want anyone to be struggling, but at the same time, that acknowledgement of the struggle is not only going to help that person, but what we see is one person in a group, whether it's a shift or an entire department, acknowledges that they are struggling or have been struggling, and it's a domino effect. So it's almost like, one person helps themselves, and then before you know it, there are more and more people kind of coming out of the woodwork in that area or that department that are also saying, hey, I'm struggling, or let's really put some time and energy into a behavioral health program. So that is cool. And I think that's what keeps me going a lot of the time. And that's another sort of aspect of the first responder culture that I really love, is this like level of excitement when the light bulbs go off, and the click is there in terms of this information and then what you all go through on a regular basis. I'm not saying that every firefighter or first responder is going to struggle with behavioral health, but I kind of think all people do to some degree within their lives. So to see men primarily acknowledging that that struggle is real, that maybe they need help, they can't do it all, is really cool to be a witness to. And if I spend too much time thinking about it, my eyes will start to water and then I'll cry, and can't have that. So
What? No emotion.
your
Let's not
next
get
question.
in. Let's not get in the emotion part of this. Okay, let's stick to the facts. All right.
Yeah.
Well, no, you brought up a perfect thing, which is it's a feel good moment, and it's true. But I want to kind of elaborate on that because there is for me, and I'll speak for myself as a practitioner, there is absolutely a little bit of selfish and like ego stroking when somebody comes to me and says, "Okay, you were right. I finally need help." Right? Like that feels good because you're like, I knew it. I knew you were hurting. I knew your back was killing you. So good. But overwhelmingly, like I would put that in like maybe 5% of the feel good. And the other 95% is like, thank God this person's finally going to stop hurting so much. Like that, it feels good to know that I was right, but it feels even better like a year from now or however long their treatment plan is, seeing them not struggling with the same things that were so obviously a problem in the past. And so, if you're listening and this kind of strikes home for you, know that you may say, I'm not hurting, and a majority of the people who don't have the training in whatever field that you're denying might think that you're pulling it off. But the practitioners who are maybe suggesting there's an issue, they know it, and they can see kind of the whole scope of it. They know how it starts, goes through, and ends, and they can tell what part of it you're in, and you're not hiding anything from the practitioner. So
Yeah.
absolutely,
Well,
there's going to be a little bit of feel good for the practitioner, but just know that most of that feel good comes from us finally seeing you not be in so much pain in one form or another.
yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of hit that home a little bit more too, many firefighters and first responders are waiting a really long time before they are making that acknowledgement. So you're at this really high level of functioning where you're still able to show up and work this high stress job with lots of physical and mental demands. And then you stack all these behavioral health concerns or challenges or conditions on top of someone, and they're still, performing at that high level. And then ultimately they come to this point of saying, okay, I need help. So that acuity has gotten more intense, more severe. So to see them make those connections and get that help when they finally do, it for many people almost is like a life or death situation, like this pivotal moment of either I go down this path or I go down this other path. And one is going to be, well, they're both probably going to be really difficult, but one is going to require that I be super introspective and deal with all this stuff that I've been avoiding. And that's going to be really hard and intense, but it's going to help me and my family and my work and all these other domains of my life. Or I go down this other path of probably least resistance and I continue to worsen. My functioning declines. I develop an alcohol issue. I lose my job. I get divorced. Like all these horrible life things happen. And if we just dial it back a little bit, we're able to see that there was this moment in time where you had this choice. And of course, we all want people to go down that, I'm hesitant to call it the right path, but the one that encourages quality of life. So to see people taking that initiative and taking that step is just really awesome. And as a provider, you're sitting there watching them walk down the path and thinking they are in it. Like they are in for a tough road, but like more power to them. I'm so excited to see what happens. And we oftentimes don't get to see the outcome of those treatment journeys and Sometimes, we'll get to see people at a conference or something, and oh man, you talk about like tearful moments when someone comes up to you and you've talked to them 2 years ago when they were calling and making that initial acknowledgement of struggle, and then 2 years later they're like, my life is great, I'm not suicidal anymore, like all of these things, like waterworks. I cannot stop crying. Usually I have to be like, okay, I have to walk away now because you are really getting me. Because that's just, it's not something that you typically see in behavioral health, whether you're working in inpatient psych or in a residential treatment center, or maybe even in an outpatient setting. You usually don't get to see the long-term progress that someone makes. So those full circle moments are really what keep me in it. And being that the IAFF, even though it's a super large organization, it's a small, kind of circle of people. So you do have the opportunity to run into people that you've helped later down the road. And maybe that's a part of it that kind of keeps me in it. I don't know that I've ever really thought of it like that before, but I will say that firefighters specifically are very motivated and willing to put in the work once they get to that level of care that they need to be in. And that's something that I think sets you all apart too from other populations and really keeps me going, is that willingness to put in the work. Because the average person, they may not, it may be easier just to say, I'm going to get a different job, I'm going to move across the country, I'm never going to talk to these people again, and that's how I'm going to solve my problem. Maybe that works for them, but for firefighters, that's oftentimes not an option because the job is part of their identity. They're very rooted individuals in their communities. And so to just walk away from all of that typically isn't the answer. So seeing those connections and those full circle moments, I don't know, it's pretty cool to be a witness to.
Well, I think so. I'm pretty sure that for anybody listening, that part of this probably meant more than a lot of stuff we're going to talk about, because, and it might not be the part you expect, but that lack of closure is one of the absolute worst parts of the job. Like, just terrible. And that's one more reason, I suppose, why when we were talking, it was so quick and easy to relate and kind of have so many commonalities between the way you approach your job and I approach my job. Because I think anybody who's listening to this and works in the fire service can be like, that is exactly how I feel with a majority of patients or situations that I really got invested in over the course of 20 minutes, and have no idea how it turned out. I mean, the lack of closure is absolutely one of the greatest stressors that I've come across in over 15 years of doing this. So much so that when I was brand new, we had and this comes up every year, so I kind of share it every year. We had a call with a lady who had a prolapse cord, and we discovered it, and I had like days on. I had like 3 or 4 years on as a medic somewhere else, but I was brand new, and we mitigated it. Like, there were senior guys there who knew what to do. I was competent as a medic. We put everything in the right place. I happened to be the person that did the old keep the pressure off the cord maneuver, and rode with that lady all the way to the operating room, and then she successfully had a C-section, and they took the kid out. Through the magic of social media, somehow or another, I think coincidentally, she lives in town, obviously, and I lived right next to town for a long time, and now I live kind of in town again. I saw her, my brother who works in the same department saw her, and we recognized her, and she recognized me and recognized us. And through the magic of social media, I've been able to kind of keep tabs on this kid now, and he's just got into high school. And it's one of those things where it's like, that's a lifeline back for me sometimes, of like, once in a while this stuff works out okay, and for every 10 or 12 calls that seem like they're going poorly, but you think you made a difference, but you don't quite know, there's always those handful that like, oh, I saw that person 6 months later, or I get to see this kid now going to high school that would have had a kind of a dire consequence if we didn't treat it right, or if it wasn't caught when we did. And so that lack of closure, I think a lot of people can relate to, because it's a terrible stressor. And so for you to have that commonality also, I think, is just one more reason why you're such a valuable asset to kind of our people.
Well, thank you. But I just wanted to add to your point. I think it is so important because we're hardwired, as human beings to really be pessimistic and have that negativity bias, because that's what keeps us safe and aware of, those threats in our environment. And so when those terrible things happen, or we make those mistakes, or outcomes aren't what we want them to be, we tend to focus on that, and we remember all the bad versus all the good. So having those full circle moments, as we're calling them, or when we get to hear about the positive outcome, that may help to offset some of that cynicism, or kind of that perspective, I think, that comes along with stress and trauma of, dang, the world is all bad, and what's the point in all of this? If you're able to remember those good, feel good moments, or situations where you feel like you did everything right and the outcome was good, that can be kind of that motivator sometimes, potentially in those situations where it's like, I can't do this anymore.
Yeah. And so decades and decades of that, right? We're going to kind of jump into something that we talked about on our previous phone call, and you hit it real quick earlier, but I want to put it back in the context we talked about it. There's more resources now available than ever, and there's more to come, obviously, but just the availability, the acknowledging that this is a thing, and people being willing and, like yourself, trained to help, and then trained to vet people in the next step of not only you're turned on to help, but here's where you can go to actually start making progress. One of the things I've seen with after some pretty critical calls is the younger guys really don't have a scope of what's going on necessarily, or they know it was bad, but they don't have decades and decades of trauma put upon them to really be that deeply and obviously affected by it. But what we'll see is the older guys who may have fallen into some bad lifestyle habits, who may have had a tumultuous couple years or decade before them, they'll step up and say like, hey, these young guys don't know how bad that was, but I think they could really use to talk to somebody. And the way I've seen it is the old guy needed the help and was using the young guy as an excuse to call someone to talk to the crew, and that led down a line of questioning that you kind of go through that I was like, oh man, this is exactly how I would talk to someone on an ambulance call that was withholding information or who was difficult to get information out of. So why don't you just take us through kind of the different approaches you've seen of people asking for help? Because I think there's going to be a lot of people that even after hearing this or even after going and seeing your presentations still may know that they might need something or it's out there and I should take advantage of it. But what have you seen people taking that first step of actually asking for help?
Well, it comes in a variety of different formats. There are, of course, those people that are able to be vulnerable and have no problem acknowledging that something may be difficult. And those are unicorns, I think. People that are able to just kind of stand up and say, hey, I have a problem. Someone help me, or, I need X, Y, or Z. It's rare, but it does happen. So, that's one way that we see that coming through, whether it's for educational, requests like presentations, or even something more severe, like someone needing to go inpatient. There are people out there that kind of just take the initiative on that. But I think more often than not, it is like your example of, hey, I think so-and-so may be struggling, or, there's been this event, maybe it's a line of duty death or some other type of significant event within the department where, either someone died or was seriously injured, or some sort of other, significant experience has happened, and someone, or maybe a group of people, recognize that this is difficult. It could be because it's difficult for them internally, or maybe they are observing struggle in other people, and then they reach out and make that request or call to us. So, I think that's more common, and getting to your question about, how we approach those situations when someone is calling and expressing that something is difficult for someone else. I think the first question or thought maybe that you have to have is, how does this person know that it's difficult, or that someone is having a difficult time or challenging time processing the event? Are there observable signs that you've seen in that person? What are they? How do you know that? And then, if someone doesn't have the answer to that, if there aren't observable signs, or they haven't been able to pick up on that, then you kind of go down the line of questioning of, well, was this difficult for you? Is there something going on internally for you that is driving you to make this call or make this request, whether it's for peer support or education? There's a lot of different needs out there. So it can kind of be like a two birds, one stone sort of situation where someone may be reaching out initially on behalf of someone else, and then through your questioning or just conversation, I usually take more of the conversational approach. You can typically get a lot of the answers to your questions if you're just a normal person and talk to someone and listen. But through that conversation and question and answer format, you come to find that, wow, not only do maybe these rookies or probies need this information about the significance of this event, but the older guys and gals do too. And here's how I know that, because I've sat and talked to this chief or this captain, and they're acknowledging their own struggle, or I'm picking up signs of that. And usually if that's the case, I will even sometimes go as far to say, like, if we're going to do a presentation and a peer support team lead or captain or some other type of leader has made that call to me, and then oftentimes they have their own personal story, I usually ask them if they'd be willing to share that, or if they'd be willing, during the course of this presentation, for me to kind of pick on them a little bit and, maybe ask some leading questions so they can put their insight or experience into the conversation too, because that's going to get people much farther in an educational environment than me just standing up there and saying, here's what I've read and here's what I've researched and this is what I know to be true. Some people may accept that, but I think the majority want to hear that lived experience from their own. So I think it's really awesome, no matter where or how the ask comes through. But if people are willing to put their own vulnerabilities out there and kind of model some of this stuff in conjunction with that, kind of professional, I'm not an expert, but expert type of approach to passing on this information, that's the best scenario in terms of education and messaging landing for people.
Yeah. And I remember from our original talk, one of the questions specifically that you asked that I thought it wasn't sneaky, but it was very smart. If you get, because I'm envisioning certain people right now that I work with that did this, and they said, like, yeah, that was a bad call, and I think you should call in somebody to talk to so and so because he's a young guy and this and that. And my job as an officer is to be like, okay, I understand that need, and now I'm going to do my best to see what we can provide. Right? That's kind of my scope, is facilitate what the people need and do my best to make sure it's carried through. Now, you took a line of questioning. I'm pretty sure your first question back to that person was almost something like, well, why would that situation be so difficult for that person? Like, what about that call do you think that person's having trouble with? Mm-hmm. And, I remember saying, like, I bet you get a lot of stories back when you ask that question, because now you're asking not why is so-and-so struggling, like, what are they doing strange? You're asking, like, well, about that call, what's so stressful about it? And then that person's going to be like, well, 15 years ago I had a call like that and it led to a lot of this and that. And all of a sudden you've kind of not duped them, but you've turned the tables on them. Now they're explaining why they actually consider it a highly stressful call. So that kind of approach of things, I think, is so effective and so similar to the way we ask patients questions. It's very similar to saying, like, do you have any medical history? And they'll be like, no. I'll be like, do you take any high blood pressure medication? They're like, oh yeah, 4 of them. I'm like, all right, so now we have hypertension. So it's one of those things you get around, and you kind of end around the question to get the answer that you may think is already there.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of like a fact-finding sort of situation. And if people start to express or, talk about why they think it's a problem for other people based on their previous experiences, oftentimes the conversation will turn towards, wow, that sounds like a very difficult experience that you went through 10 years ago. Were you able to, process that and get treatment for it? Or did you need treatment for it? Do you feel like you're still struggling? So again, it's like that 2 bird, 1 stone sort of approach. Maybe simultaneously, I'm encouraging someone to get their own treatment for something that happened 15 years ago, and then maybe also preventing something from developing in someone else because of the early acknowledgement of the possible problem.
Right. And I like that you use the word encouragement. I don't mean make it sound like a booby trap that you're walking into, that anytime you ask for help for someone, you're going to get psychoanalyzed. But encouraging maybe the identification or resolution of some of this stuff. So we're running out of time, which is fine, because you're constantly putting stuff out there, like you said, and that's perfect. You have a presentation coming up in a week from my department. If people get to listen to this 1 week in advance and they just want some information on what they're going to encounter there, what approach would you take to I guess pre-comfort someone into coming to this thing? Because it's going to be, no matter what, it's going to be kind of stressful, right? And we're going to be talking about stuff that's a little bit touchy, potentially. What would you say to people to be like, hey, a week from now, it's all good, come on in?
Well, I think that's a great question, especially being that this specific presentation is voluntary. Many times we are providing mandatory trainings for departments, and so people can't get out of it necessarily. But in this scenario, it is a voluntary evening presentation for families and fire service members. So what we are going to do is start with a introductory sort of course. It's called Behavioral Health Awareness for Fire Service Members and Families. It's a very straightforward topic or title there, but we're going to just kind of set the scene or stage for what are the most common behavioral health conditions for fire service members. So how do things like depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress, substance use, and suicidality present? What are those signs and symptoms? And for most of these conditions, there's some sort of spectrum to it. So mild, moderate to severe sort of cases. So at each level, what does that look like? How can I recognize that in myself and my peers? And then my spouses, how can they pick up on this at home? A lot of these behavioral health symptoms first come up at home. And if you think about it, that's where we're most comfortable. And so that's typically where those less than desirable maybe qualities that we possess or ways of being kind of first come out. So that reaction and anger or irritability is typically directed at the family first. So kind of giving spouses that insight and being able to make those own connections for themselves is really a big goal here. And then the last part of the presentation is focused on what I call relationship resiliency. It's based around the Gottman method, which John Gottman is a researcher in the behavioral health space. He and his wife have done a lot of work in terms of relationships and have even gotten to the point of being able to predict through observation couples that will end up getting a divorce. So we're using their framework and kind of giving the audience tips on how they can apply these concepts at home, and also through that like firefighter framework of shift work, high stress, high trauma jobs, all those different kind of intricacies or unique aspects of the fire service that those men and women bring home. So I think it's a really good course for anyone. I think a lot of times there's big takeaways for those new firefighters and those girlfriends or spouses that are, new to this environment maybe, or to this job. It's going to give them a lot of insight and background, probably on the fire service as a whole, but then also like, okay, this job may change my firefighter. They may, be a different person 20 years from now, which hopefully they are, because we should all be learning and growing and developing no matter what's going on in our lives. But that could change them for the better or for the worse. And so now that I'm more prepared for it and have this knowledge and insight, then maybe I can be more supportive rather than confrontational or skeptical even of my firefighter. I think something that really landed for me when I first started in this job and was kind of trying to learn as much as I possibly could about the firefighter culture and the day to day, and then, how it all permeates into other aspects of a person's life was through this clinician and ultimately kind of mentor. Her name's Jada Hudson. She's from Sugar Grove there in Illinois. So people may be familiar with her, but the family is something I've always been concerned about or interested in. And she kind of put it to me in a way that really made sense, that these spouses and significant others of fire service members are almost like at a deficit when they don't have this information, because what are they doing when their firefighter comes home and is emotionally detached and shut down and, maybe numbing out? They're going to pull from whatever the media tells us or what history has told us or whatever, kind of our culture says that, okay, when my loved one checks out and doesn't talk to me and is all up in their phone, that means that they're cheating on me. So now they're cheating on me and I'm going to respond to that in a certain way that's not helpful. And then now we're in a fight and we're fighting about something so off base than what is actually going on, because what's actually going on is my firefighter is struggling with a traumatic call and they're trying to process that. And if only I had known that and led with that mindset initially, then maybe I would have been supportive rather than confrontational, and maybe we wouldn't, be at this level of fighting that we're at, and potentially, and this is maybe assuming a lot about what I'm able to do in these presentations, but we know the divorce rate is really high for first responders, so maybe providing this education is a way to mitigate or reduce some of that. So I think that there's a lot of information in this presentation for everyone that it's intended for. So, there's stuff that firefighters are going to learn to be able to apply to themselves. There's a peer support element, so you'll be able to take that back and continue this behavioral health awareness and initiative that's clearly important. And then, of course, spouses, they're going to be able to learn more about their firefighters, about communication. And then hopefully that couple too is learning some resiliency skills. So multifaceted, I guess, is the way that I describe it.
Molly, if there's something I've learned after 2 conversations with you now, is that you over-deliver. And
I can talk to a wall, remember?
I love it because we are in need. And I know we try to over-deliver, right, in a lot of situations on calls and do everything we can. And I see nothing but the same coming back from you. And I promise everything you're willing to over-deliver, there's someone out there who is willing to take it or listen to it or use it or think about it. And hopefully that long game pays off and we all come around to the stuff we need. So I really appreciate it. This was awesome. This was better than the first time we talked. I think we covered a lot of ground, and I'm excited for the presentation next week and to kind of keep talking to you. I'll probably cut this part out, but I'm pretty sure I'm in Jada Hudson's book she wrote.
Oh, yeah?
She invited me to contribute to an article 3 or 4 years ago in fire engineering, and I think she took an excerpt from that I had a quote in and used it in her book that she published, I think.
Well, I'm staring at that book right now, so I'll have to do some digging. I've read it front to back, and for anyone, if you don't cut this out, it's called Firefighter Emotional Wellness, and it is a book that goes into all of those common concerns for firefighters. And I just think she does such a good job of putting it into easy to understand language and terminology. And it's not like too heady. You know how some self-help books or educational books can you're like, what did they even say right here? I don't even understand what this means. I never feel that way when I read her book. So I highly recommend.
Well, believe me, if she included anything I wrote down in her first draft, even then it's not heady at all. It was a part about stress response and fight or flight and cortisol and how to use physical activity to mitigate that. And it was like a little tiny 3-sentence long thing, but it might be in there. It might be in there. If not, just lie to me and tell me it is. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Molly. I really appreciate this. Like I said, I'm excited to see you, talk to you soon again, and then kind of keep talking to you. I'm sure we'll be checking back in.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me on. And I'm really excited to be out in your area next week. Hopefully you can include my contact information in the show notes. So if anyone has any questions about anything I've brought up, or wants those resources that we've vetted or whatever, they can easily get a hold of me. Like I said, I welcome those conversations. I want to help. I want to solely work with firefighters and other types of first responders. So fill up my calendar, let me make it to where I don't have time for anyone else.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you again.
Thank you so much.